Hey guys, it's me Flippy. Sorry about the dramatic title and thumbnail, but I had to get you to click on an Agents of Mayhem video somehow. Well, my NDA has expired with Deep Silver Volition, and so I thought I'd finally let you guys know about some of the things that were shared with me during the early days of AOM's launch. The coolest thing by far was the extent Volition would have gone through for mod support. There would have been an official release for mod tools, and not just wimpy table editors like they gave us with Kinsey's toy box. These tools would have actually been the same in-house tools Volition uses to make their games. We're talking over 300 gigabytes of their development tools. You could create your own missions with a visual scripting editor, and it would have included a map editor as well. Along with these tools, they would have released Stillwater and Stillport for people to mod and play around in. I was even told you could set up a modding server to collaborate with your friends and mod things together. This would have all been based on Perforce if you've ever worked with something like that. I think it was even implied that multiplayer mods were possible. Like an example I was given was the ability to have a whole group of players travel from Stillwater to Stillport to New Hades to Seoul, and even making your own activities for everyone to play was something that could have been possible if the dedication was there. I had access to a few of these tools and the documentation was all really extensive. But even more cool was that they were planning to produce a ton of video tutorials for everything as well. If you guys wanted to know why I was rooting so hard for AOM on Steam, it was for this reason. I thought it would have been the coolest thing Volition could have done for the community, but obviously it never ended up happening. This is precisely why they never announce the cool shit they have planned. Sometimes, things don't pan out, and it's better to have an idea quietly die than face the wrath of thousands of upset fans who feel robbed over a cancelled feature. That being said, these tools were actually planned on being announced surprisingly early, as far back as before Agents of Mayhem was even released, but Deep Silver put a stop to it. By then I'm sure they saw how poor the pre-orders were and wanted to stop the idea altogether. But despite the poor sales and outcome, they were still planning to officially announce them that October. But then the layoffs happened. At that point, the tools were surprisingly still planned to be released, but all the work was being done by one guy in his free time. By then, Agents of Mayhem was completely dead and nothing was going to save it. But the idea was that if these tools were released, they'll be 100% compatible with the new Saints Row reboot. And so day one, Saints Row will have a ton of compatible UGC from Agents of Mayhem, along with an active modding community that will have a whole new game to create content for. Sadly, of course, this never ended up happening. Eventually, after like a year and a half, I was told that the tools were officially cancelled for AOM, but the project might resume for the reboot. Now, the reboot eventually became an Epic Games Store exclusive. I have no idea if that has anything to do with anything, but from what I've been hearing, these mod tools, if they're still even coming out at all, probably won't be out until next year when the game is released on Steam. If they're still going to do it at all, that is. You never know. Game development is completely unpredictable, for many factors, but a lot of it just comes down to business. So everyone knows that GAT was a last-minute addition to Agents of Mayhem, and it seemed quite suspicious when he was announced. Many people assumed that Volition used GAT as a last-ditch effort to increase the non-existent hype for AOM. That wasn't the case at all. It's somehow even more bizarre than that. This wasn't Volition's idea. Surprisingly, this wasn't even Deep Silver's idea. But Sony. Sony demanded that GAT must be an AOM. And so, they did it. They got Daniel Day Kim back and designed an entire agent and mission pack around Johnny Gat. All because Sony demanded it. Now, what business is it of Sony to force them to use one of their previous characters for the game? Well, there were talks about making the game PlayStation exclusive. Then that deal fell through. So then Sony said, well, how about you make an exclusive DLC for the PlayStation 4 based around your oh-so-popular Johnny Gat character? And then after some more negotiations, they just ultimately settled to have Johnny Gat in the game. And so now Johnny Gat is in the game. Thanks, Sony! So knowing that soul-sucking story, there's no telling what other insane creative decisions are being made for Volition. And with that in mind, I'm going to segue into another horrible AOM story. Apparently, upper management at Volition was straight up lying to Deep Silver about the progress of AOM. From what I was told, they were sending proof of concept renders to Deep Silver and telling them that those features were completed and working in the game, when in reality, it couldn't have been further from the truth. This apparently went on for a good while, like over a year. Eventually Deep Silver was like, so what's going on? How's the game now? And then we're of course completely shocked to find that nothing Volition said was true. Some of these features weren't even made known to the team itself, let alone started. In other words, Volition was communicating a very different reality to them than what was really happening. They were under a very wrong impression about what the game was and taking things Volition said at their word. This was all corruption from the top of the studio, and it ended up punishing everyone. Deep Silver eventually learned the truth and freaked the fuck out and basically demanded they get the game ready to ship ASAP, with a few additional requests. In fact, a lot of additional requests. They didn't feel like the game was anywhere near the AAA quality they paid to have produced, and so a few missions were added at their demand. All the Legion Layer stuff in the crit path was a last-minute addition. Those were originally just supposed to be things you found in the open world. All the special agent investigation missions, all last-minute requests by Deep Silver. In fact, the reason I'm told AOM was so buggy was because of all these last-minute requests by Deep Silver, and they were given no time to properly test them. So Deep Silver isn't completely innocent in this either. I heard they were a gigantic pain in the ass to work with. They would send Volition 50-page reports about how Ubisoft is modeling rocks in their game, and how Volition needs to try and live up to their quality as a AAA studio. They would constantly compare Volition to Rockstar and belittle them because their vehicles were not the same quality as Forza. Completely missing the point that not only are they not trying to make a racing game like that, those companies have 30 times the amount of employees than Volition. Weeks would go by where they said Volition couldn't do anything until Deep Silver gave them this detailed mandatory feedback. It's almost like they were setting the game up to fail. From what I got from it all, there was a bit of finger pointing going on between Deep Silver and Volition as to who was really at fault for the game's demise. On a more minor note, there were alleged cases of bullying happening within the Volition studio, along with heated confrontational arguments. But out of all of what I'm telling you in this video, I know about this the least. It could have been a one-time thing for all I know, like a bad day at the job or something. I don't know, none of the people involved even work there anymore, so I don't know. I'm not saying any of this had any significant impact on anything at all, but I do think it's an interesting anecdote. When you see how rough and downright abysmal some of these games turn out to be, you can't help but wonder, wow, what the fuck happened? Well, a lot happens. This is just the ugly side of the story, the stuff they won't tell you. At least not on record. Basically everyone I've spoken to has confided to me that the whole thing is a shit show. A dumpster fire and a shit show. I guess I could leave you with some other fun stuff about AOM, like I have a ton of cut agent cutscenes. Some of them are completely animated, some are just storyboards. The game was originally supposed to ship with 3 cities, Seoul, Moscow, and Dubai, I believe. Seoul was actually going to be a lot smaller than what it was, but when the 3 cities idea was canned, they added things like the shipping crate yard along with a few other areas to the map. There were going to be 100 playable agents, but most of the stuff wound up being planned for DLC instead. I have access to a nearly completed DLC pack that has an extended area of Seoul. Monaco would have had a huge racing theme to it. Moscow had most of the work done to it before production was shut down. I mean, seriously, I know so much about this game. Oh yeah, AOM 2, that was even being planned. Matt Miller was going to be a villain of AOM 2. It would have had a Nightblade comic book vibe. Gat would have had an evil clone. There were going to be multiplayer modes called Legion versus Mayhem. Just whatever. Honestly, I think you guys care about this the least, and to be honest, this is something Volition can eventually show you guys. If they ever resume the streams, they'll have a lot of great AOM lore to tell you. I'll leave it to them. A lot of stuff planned, but almost immediately after release, everything was stopped by Deep Silver. Can't really say I blame them. Volition stalled production and outright lied to Deep Silver, and Deep Silver demanded a bunch of last-minute requests until the game became broken and then stopped any more patches from being released. And that basically sums up what really happened to Agents of Mayhem. Anyways guys, that's it. I hope this was all insightful for you, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace!